Hey everyone, my name is Justin. I'm one of the youth associates here at Village Church, and I'm absolutely pumped to be with you guys here today. If you're new here, if this is your first time engaging with Village Youth in any sort of way, special welcome to you. We're so glad to have you with us, and this is actually a really good week for you to be joining us because we're starting a brand new series called This or That. Maybe you've played that game before where you have to choose which of the options you prefer, like cats or dogs, summer or winter, sweet or savory, this or that. And with that idea in mind, in this series, we are going to be spending our time looking at the Sermon on the Mount, which is probably like the most famous and most well-known section of Jesus' teachings in all of the Bible. And our goal is by the end of our time together that we would be able to see the differences between two ways of life, two ways of seeing and interacting with reality, and that ultimately we would make a choice about which way we would rather have our life, this or that. Would we rather live our life according to the way of the world or according to the way of Jesus? According to the way of the kingdom of the world or the kingdom of God? According to what other people say is best or what God says is best? And here's why this is important. We are all being influenced by someone or something. And let's face it, in high school, you guys are being bombarded with different influences trying to tell you who you should be and how you should live your life. There are continual voices from culture and media, celebrities, online, at school, with your friends, coming at you again and again, telling you who you should be and how you should go about living your life. And if we're honest, constantly navigating the different options in front of us can be extremely overwhelming and can sometimes leave us feeling a little bit restless, anxious, and maybe a little bit lost. But then, over 2,000 years ago, Jesus, he comes along and he provides a different way forward. Through his Sermon on the Mount, Jesus provides a different roadmap or a different blueprint for life, one that might seem backwards to our world and our modern culture, but a way that I believe is good. It's reliable and 100% worth choosing to follow because in the Sermon on the Mount, we find the greatest speech of all time, given by the greatest teacher of all time. And when I say greatest, what I mean is most influential. This is the most influential speech of all time, and Jesus is the most influential teacher of all time. Hey, that might be pretty crazy for me to say because there are a lot of very influential people throughout history that have given very influential speeches, but I don't think any of them come close to what Jesus did on the Sermon on the Mount. I think of like Martin Luther King Jr. in his I Have a Dream speech, which inspired a generational movement of people to fight against racism. I think of when Abraham Lincoln said 77 years ago. This speech inspired an entire nation to be better and to pursue peace together. And I think of Winston Churchill's great speech where he said, "We shall fight on the beaches," where he revived the spirit of the people and provided them with hope to continue fighting for freedom. These are great and influential speeches given by very influential people throughout history, and they ultimately moved large numbers of people to action and caused tangible change during their time. But I would argue that none of these speeches come close to what Jesus did in the Sermon on the Mount. You see, the Sermon on the Mount has stood the test of time, and it remains to be one of the most relevant, appealing, challenging, brilliant, and overall life-changing and influential speeches of all time. These words of Jesus are both profound and practical, as he offers us a manifesto or a map or a blueprint to what it looks like to live in the kingdom of God. And I believe that if we would actually just take the words of Jesus seriously, if we would allow the words of his great sermon to penetrate our hearts and our minds, that we would come out on the other side a radically transformed group of people who are truly experiencing the good life. So today, we're going to read the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, and hopefully you will see a difference between the kingdom of the world and the kingdom of God, and be able to decide which one you would rather have influencing your life. But before we jump into the Bible, let's take a few minutes and talk about this idea of influence. So why don't you turn to your small group or the people around you, or if you're watching this online, think about this question and share your thoughts with someone you trust. Here's a question. What causes someone or something to have influence and why? Hey everyone, welcome back. I hope that discussion was helpful for you and that you're beginning to see that we're all influenced by someone or something, and we have to decide what we will allow to influence the way we live our lives moving forward. So like I said, we are going to spend the rest of our time looking at the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, a section that is often called the Beatitudes. So let's read Matthew 5, 1 to 12 together. Seeing the crowds, he, Jesus, went up on the mountain, and when he sat down, his disciples came to him. And he opened his mouth and he taught them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you, falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For so they persecuted the prophets who were before you." Okay, so here we have the Beatitudes, or the blessing statements. And upon first glance, these statements actually might appear to be a bit upside down to some of us. They seem kind of backwards because in our world, it's usually a different type of people that we would normally describe as being blessed, right? In our world, the rich, the powerful, the popular, the successful, the attractive, the confident, the privileged are the types of people the world would consider blessed. And I love what Jesus is doing here because right from the start of his sermon, Jesus is completely flipping things upside down and he's redefining who's actually blessed. This is incredibly countercultural. Like imagine you go to like a job interview and you start listing off the Beatitudes as like your main character traits. My guess is that there's a good chance you might not even get hired. But Jesus looks at these and he blesses these type of people. And I think this entire list should cause us to pause and reconsider everything. Because no longer is it just the people who are on top who are blessed. It's the poor in spirit. It's those who mourn, the meek, the merciful. They are now the ones who are blessed in this new kind of kingdom. But what does that even mean? Like, what does it mean to be blessed? Well, this word blessed in this passage comes from the Greek word makarios. And this is kind of like a pretty tricky word for us to translate. And really smart people have tried a number of different ways to get this meaning across. Some people would use the word happy or fortunate or lucky or even this idea of congratulations. But I would argue with those who, or I would agree with those who argue that a meaning of this word is best captured not in a single word, but more in a phrase. In sync. These 8 blessings are what it looks like to be in sync with the kingdom of God. To be blessed is to be in sync with Jesus. To be blessed is to be in sync with God himself. And I love this because it shows us something important. Because Jesus is starting his great speech, not with a list of requirements, not with a list of to-dos. And this is really important because I think a lot of us grow up with misconceptions about what Christianity really is. Maybe you see Christianity as being very performance-based or behavior-based. Because if you're anything like me, when I was growing up, like what was going on in my mind is that Christianity is just a list of rules or to-dos or requirements that you have to achieve or accomplish so that one day you'll be rewarded and you'll get a golden ticket to heaven so that you can go there one day when you die. But the attitudes are less about getting you to heaven and they're actually more about getting heaven into you. And this is where Jesus helps because in the Beatitudes, he does not provide a list of to-dos. He's not really commanding anything. He's simply describing to us. He's describing what it looks like when the good news of the kingdom grabs a hold of someone's heart. He's describing what it looks like when the gospel begins to transform people from the inside out. The Beatitudes are actually the result. Jesus is trying to paint a picture of what kingdom living actually looks like. So the Beatitudes, they're not a list of to-dos. They're not qualities that we strive for or crushing ideals that we try to achieve on our own. They're meant to be not prescriptive and tell us what we need to do, but instead they are descriptive. They paint a picture of the type of people that Jesus is helping us to become. Darrell Johnson, he's an author and a pastor, and I love how he puts it. He says this: in the Beatitudes, Jesus is giving us a profile of the new humanity that emerges when the reign of God breaks into our brokenness. This is about the kingdom of God, the reign and the rule of God coming into our world and our lives and transforming us from the inside out. Jesus is saying, I am the true king, and I want to help you become the type of people who are in sync with my kingdom, a new humanity, beatitude people. So let's take a quick look at the first beatitude because I think the first one actually helps us make sense of the rest of this list. This is what it says: blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So what does it mean to be poor in spirit? Well, in the New Testament, there are actually two words that can be used to describe the poor. One refers to like the working poor, like people who are living like paycheck to paycheck, someone who would be considered maybe low income in our world. And the second type of poor refers to those who are literally like at the end of themselves, those who have nothing left, people that are helpless, and all they can do is beg from other people for help. Now, what's crazy is that in this passage, Jesus is using the second type of poor to refer to those who are blessed in the kingdom of God. The people who are blessed are those with empty hands, empty pockets, with nothing to offer, begging for help. So what I think he's saying here is that to be in sync with the kingdom is to understand that we come to God with nothing to offer. We come to him spiritually bankrupt, and we understand that our sin has actually separated us from God, and there's nothing that we can do to solve this problem on our own. We come to him recognizing our desperate need for help in our lives. So the Beatitudes actually start with this idea that we have nothing to offer spiritually. Now, this might sound pretty negative, right, if we're being honest, but it's actually a good thing. Because this means that God's work in my life is not dependent on my perfection or even my performance. Let me say that again, because some of you really need to hear this. God's work in your life is not dependent on your perfection or your performance. I mean, we spend so much of our lives trying to prove ourselves to others, don't we? Trying to get affirmation and approval from other people, so we do all that we can to manage other people's perceptions of us so that they will accept us. And we hide our weaknesses and we only present the best version of ourselves. We work so hard to do what we think others want us to do and be the type of people that others want us to be. And when we don't get that affirmation or that approval or that acceptance, it can be crushing. But Jesus starts his sermon with this great reminder that your value is not in what you accomplish. Your value is not in what you achieve. Your value is not in how well you prove yourself to others. Your membership in the kingdom is not based on what you accomplish, but on what Jesus has already accomplished for you. You don't have to prove yourself, but you do have to let go of the idea that you can make it on your own. You see, the opposite of poor in spirit is not rich in spirit. It's actually the proud in spirit. Those who are self-reliant and self-sufficient, those who think that they just have to try harder and be better, and if given enough time, they can actually prove that they belong. Jesus is looking for humility and an accurate assessment of who we really are. Because when we compare ourselves to others, we might come to the conclusion that we're good enough, right? Like, I'm just as good as those people, or at least I'm not as bad as those people over there. But the standard for the kingdom of God is not found in how well we compare to those around us. It's found in how well we compare to Jesus. Like, he is the ultimate standard. And compared to Jesus, we all fall short. And this should humble us in the best way possible. This should help us recognize our need for God's help. So what do? Get as close to Jesus as you can. Move towards him. Cling to him. Look at him. Hope in him. Because it is in this low place, when we have nothing to offer, that Jesus says we are blessed. Theirs is the kingdom of heaven. They shall be comforted. They shall inherit the earth. They shall be satisfied. They shall receive mercy. They shall see God, and they shall be called sons of God. So the first beatitude is the foundation for everything else. And we need to understand this before we can unpack the rest of his Sermon on the Mount, because Jesus is going to set a really high standard in the rest of his sermon when it comes to all sorts of things, right? Like anxiety, anger, relationships, judgment. The standard is really high. And the first step in all of this is to recognize that we need God's help. We need him to help us and guide us through it all. We cannot do this thing on our own. We need him because there is no kingdom without the king. Our world and culture wants us to believe that we are the kings and queens, because the kingdom of the world is actually a self-serving kingdom, and this kingdom has its own list of beatitudes. Maybe you've heard some of them before. You do you. Follow your heart. Just be yourself. Do what makes you happy. Just look within. But the reality is that being your own king or queen of your own self-serving kingdom is actually a crushing burden that you were never meant to bear. So people do all sorts of things to build up their own kingdom, and every single time they're left with this thought, there's got to be something more. And this is where the gospel offers us such good news. Because Jesus did not just come down and go to the cross so that one day we can go to heaven when we die. The gospel isn't just good news for when we die. The gospel is actually good news for right now, because the Beatitudes show us that Jesus is concerned about getting not just us to heaven, he's concerned about getting more of heaven into us. The kingdom of God is breaking in, and Jesus is at work transforming broken people into beatitude people. So that together, we can show the world that there is a better option available. There's a better kingdom, and there's a better king upon the throne. A king who is not self-serving, but instead self-sacrificing. He's a king worth following, because when he sees us in our poor state, he comes down and he brings us up to new heights. So everyone's left with a choice to make, this or that. What will ultimately influence you in the way that you live your life? The kingdom of the world or the kingdom of God? The choice is yours. I hope this was helpful for you guys, and I hope this gave you something to think about. And we're going to go deeper into this discussion with our small groups, but if you're someone watching this on your own, I would encourage you to think about what we just talked about and maybe talk about it with somebody who you trust. And we will see you guys next time.